In the cold streets of Colorado, a starving boy had no one left in the world, except his loyal German shepherd, Max. Night after night, he whispered prayers into the darkness, begging God for a way out, a miracle. And then fate shifted. A lost wallet lying in a parking lot. A photo inside of a woman and child long gone. And a billionaire whose heart had been shattered years earlier. When the boy returned the wallet and asked only for a single meal, God knit two broken stories together. What the billionaire discovered, what he chose to do next, and the battle that followed when the abusive stepfather came hunting, changed everything. Now, with Max by his side and a new father figure willing to protect him at any cost, the boy learns that sometimes God's miracles don't arrive with thunder. They arrive through people who choose kindness. If you believe love can heal wounds the world cannot see, don't scroll. Hit subscribe, share, and comment Amen to help spread this story of hope, faith, and redemption. May the Lord bless and protect everyone watching. The early autumn wind swept across the small town of Ridgewood, tucked between the rugged foothills of Colorado. The season was changing fast. The crisp air carried the bite of the coming winter, and the streets were filled with swirling leaves the color of burnt amber. Ridgewood's narrow sidewalks were lined with old brick buildings, most of them worn and chipped from decades of harsh mountain weather. Street lamps flickered against the gray sky, unable to fully cut through the rising cold. Cars passed less frequently here, and people walking by buried their hands deep in their coats, eager to get home before the sun disappeared behind the mountains. It was the kind of town where cold crept into the bones long before the snow actually came. And for anyone living without shelter, each night was a quiet battle for survival. Among those fighting that battle was Ethan, a 12-year-old boy with messy brown hair, pale cheeks often smudged with dirt, and large hazel eyes that carried both fear and a strange, stubborn determination. He was thin, too thin for his age, with a frame that suggested he skipped far more meals than he ate. Yet his posture held a quiet resilience, as if he had learned early that collapsing was not an option. Ethan wore an oversized gray hoodie with frayed cuffs, jeans that were too short for his growing legs, and old sneakers with the soles nearly peeling off. Everything about him, his clothes, his bowed shoulders, the bruises fading yellow on his forearm, hinted at a childhood far harsher than most. Beside him trotted Max, a loyal German shepherd about 3 years old, large and muscular, with a thick tan and black coat that stood out against the cool hues of the street. Max had intelligent brown eyes, always alert, always watching for danger like a soldier guarding his partner. His right ear had a small notch near the tip, the leftover scar from a fight with a stray dog months earlier, a fight Max had won to protect Ethan. Despite his imposing size, Max walked close to the boy's side with a gentleness that revealed the bond between them. He understood the boy's fear, hunger, and exhaustion. Max was Ethan's shield, and Ethan was Max's world. They walked together under the dimming sky, heading nowhere in particular, just away from the small, creaking house at the edge of town where Ethan's stepfather lived. Rick, the man Ethan had fled from, was a stocky, middle-aged man with a square jaw covered in patchy stubble, gray-streaked hair, and a permanent scowl carved into his rough features. Rick's broad shoulders and heavy boots gave him an intimidating presence, but what truly made him terrifying was his temper. He had once been a construction worker, but a fall years ago injured his back and ended his career. The pain, combined with the bitterness of losing his job, turned him cruel. He drank heavily, lashed out easily, and believed that yelling or hitting was the only way to regain control of a life that had slipped from his grip. Ethan had been the closest target. The bruises Rick left were not just on Ethan's skin, but deep inside his memories, shaping him into someone who flinched at sudden movements and learned to stay silent to survive. When Ethan's mother died unexpectedly 2 years earlier, Rick's violence only worsened. There was no one left to shield the boy. That was why Ethan ran. He had slipped out the back door with Max on a cold dawn 3 weeks earlier, carrying nothing but a worn backpack containing a cracked water bottle, 2 stale sandwiches, and a photo of his mother smiling in a summer dress. Since then, he had survived by collecting empty cans and bottles from trash bins, selling them to a recycling center for a few coins. It wasn't much, but it was enough to buy bread or a cheap sandwich when things were good. When things were bad, Ethan simply ate less and let Max have the larger share. "You need it more than I do," he would whisper, stroking Max's fur. Max always looked at him with quiet loyalty, as if promising he would protect him even if the world didn't. As dusk settled, Ethan approached the back alley behind a small grocery store. This was where he often searched the recycling bins, hoping to find a few cans before the garbage truck came. The alley smelled of old cardboard and faintly of spoiled fruit. A woman named Mrs. Turner, who worked at the store's register, sometimes passed through to take out trash. She was a plump, soft-spoken woman in her 50s, with curly gray hair and warm brown skin. She wore thick glasses and always seemed to be rushing somewhere. She wasn't a close character in Ethan's life, but she occasionally handed him a bruised apple or a day-old sandwich with a whispered, "Eat this quickly before my boss sees." Tonight, however, she didn't appear. Ethan dug quietly through the bin, careful not to tear his already worn hoodie. When Max nudged him gently, whining, Ethan smiled faintly. "Just a little more, buddy. We'll find something to eat tonight." His voice was soft, hoarse from days of cold wind and not enough water. They left the alley with a small bag of cans, barely enough for $1, and walked toward an old gas station whose awning offered shelter for the night. As they settled under the dim fluorescent light, Ethan pulled out half a granola bar he'd saved from earlier. He broke it unevenly, giving the bigger half to Max. The dog licked his hand before eating, a gesture that warmed Ethan's chest more than the thin fabric of his hoodie ever could. The night deepened, and the wind howled as if trying to peel away the last warmth from the world. Ethan curled against Max's side, using the dog's thick coat as a blanket. His breath trembled in the cold. "Max, do you think Mom can see us?" he whispered. "I hope she can. I hope she knows we're trying." Max pressed his head against the boy's chest. Above them, the stars flickered faintly through the haze. Ethan pulled the photo of his mother from his pocket and looked at it until his eyes watered, not just from the cold. "Mom, I want to get out of this life. Please, please help me somehow." His voice cracked as he pressed the photo against his chest. Max rested a paw gently on Ethan's arm, as if saying he understood. And as the cold autumn night consumed Ridgewood, the boy and the dog fell asleep, clinging to each other for warmth, unaware that tomorrow would bring the first twist of fate that could change everything. Morning in Ridgewood arrived with a thin layer of frost clinging to the sidewalks, turning the world pale under the early light. Ethan stirred beneath the gas station awning, shivering as Max nudged him awake. The German shepherd stretched, his thick coat bristling against the cold, and let out a quiet huff, as if urging Ethan to get moving before the chill seeped deeper into their bones. Ethan rubbed his eyes, his breath fogging in the crisp air, and stood up slowly, brushing dirt from his oversized hoodie. His stomach growled, a dull ache he had grown used to, though it never became easier. They wandered toward the town center, hoping to find more cans before the cleaning crews cleared the streets. Ridgewood's main parking lot stretched beside a grocery store, its asphalt cracked from years of sun and snow. As Ethan and Max crossed the lot, Max suddenly stopped, sniffing at something near the faded white line of a parking space. Ethan followed his gaze and saw a brown leather wallet lying face down, the kind of wallet that looked far too expensive for a place like this. The stitching was perfect, the leather polished, and the initials J.M. were embossed elegantly in the corner. Ethan picked it up cautiously, glancing around to see if anyone was nearby. Max tilted his head, waiting. Ethan opened the wallet just enough to check for identification and blinked in surprise. Inside was a neat stack of crisp bills and a small, worn photograph. The picture was of a beautiful woman with soft blonde hair and gentle blue eyes, holding a little boy with a bright smile and sandy brown hair. The edges of the photo were creased, as if someone had carried it for years, unable to let it go. Ethan stared at it longer than he meant to. There was something about the woman's warm expression, full of kindness, that reminded him of his own mother. He swallowed, closed the wallet, and whispered to Max, "We need to take this to the police." Max wagged his tail once, as if agreeing. Ethan could have kept the money, but the thought made his chest tighten. Someone out there was missing this photo. Someone would be hurting. Ethan understood that kind of hurt too well. The Ridgewood police station was a small brick building with peeling paint and an old flag fluttering above the entrance. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of coffee and dusty carpet. Ethan approached the front desk, where a middle-aged officer named Deputy Harris sat. Harris was a tall, heavy-set man with thinning brown hair, a small mustache, and kind eyes that had seen far too much hardship in this town. He had worked the job for nearly 20 years and had developed a protective softness toward children, especially ones who looked like they had nowhere to go. His voice was deep but gentle when he looked up and noticed Ethan. "Morning, son. What can I do for you?" Ethan placed the wallet on the counter with both hands, as if he were afraid of damaging it. "I found this, near the grocery store parking lot." Harris opened it, scanned the ID, then paused at the photograph. His expression softened. "This belongs to John Miller. He's well known around here. Surprised he'd lose something." He glanced at Ethan. "You didn't take anything from it?" Ethan shook his head quickly. "No, sir. I just thought it should go back. Someone probably needs that picture." Harris studied the boy for a moment. He noticed the bruised shadows under Ethan's eyes, the way he kept his shoulders slightly hunched, and how the big German shepherd stayed close, protective. "You know, most kids your age would have kept the money." Ethan hesitated. "I don't want money. If possible, could Max and I have a meal? Just something small." His cheeks flushed, embarrassed to ask. Harris's chest tightened. "Of course, son. I'll make sure you get something." But his thoughts lingered on the boy long after the words left his mouth. Meanwhile, across town, John Miller sat inside his massive office overlooking the Rocky Mountains. John was in his early 40s, tall and lean, with a sharp jawline softened only by fatigue. His dark hair was speckled with early gray, a marking of stress more than age. His blue eyes, once bright, were now distant, clouded by years of grief. He had built his wealth from tech companies and investments, But all his success meant nothing after losing his wife Emily and their son Lucas in a tragic car accident 5 years earlier. Since then, John lived alone, a man swallowed by silence and regret. The only thing he kept close was the photo in his wallet, the last piece of his family he had left. His assistant, Clara, a thin woman in her 30s with black hair tied neatly in a bun and a no-nonsense demeanor, stepped into his office. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice steady but sympathetic. "The police station just called. Someone turned in your wallet." John froze. "My wallet?" "They said a boy found it. They said he didn't ask for any reward, just a meal." John's heart slammed against his ribs. He stood immediately, grabbing his coat. "I need to go. Now." Clara watched him leave with a worried expression. She had worked for John for years, long enough to know that anything related to his family shook him deeply. Losing that wallet would have destroyed him. Minutes later, John burst through the station doors. Harris greeted him, returning the wallet. But when John opened it and saw the photo inside, his hands trembled. "Thank God," he whispered, holding the picture against his chest. "This is the only thing I have left of them." His voice broke. Harris nodded toward the corner, where Ethan waited with Max. "The boy brought it in. Said he just wanted a meal." John turned, his gaze landing on the small, tired child with the loyal dog beside him. Something inside him shifted, something long dormant. The wallet had been lost, but what John found here in this station would change all of their lives. John stood still for a moment, watching the small boy and the large German shepherd sitting quietly in the corner of the police station. Ethan's clothes were thin for the weather, and Max stayed glued to his side like a guardian. Something inside John felt as if a long-shut door had cracked open. He approached with careful steps, not wanting to startle the boy. "Ethan, right?" he asked softly. Ethan nodded, eyes darting nervously before settling on John's gentle expression. Max sniffed the air, then sat upright, evaluating the stranger with cautious intelligence. After speaking briefly with Deputy Harris, John suggested taking Ethan and Max for a warm meal. Ethan hesitated, but when his stomach growled loud enough for Max to flick an ear, he nodded shyly. Outside, John led them to his dark sedan parked nearby. His driver, Michael, a broad-shouldered man in his late 40s with close-cropped black hair and a neatly kept beard, stepped out and opened the door. Michael had the air of someone who had spent years in disciplined environments, his posture straight, movements controlled, and eyes observant. He had once worked in private security before joining John years ago, and though he rarely spoke unless necessary, he carried a firm kindness toward anyone vulnerable, especially children. When he saw Ethan's thin frame and Max's alert stance, he softened. "We'll make sure you both are comfortable," he said quietly before helping them into the car. The ride to the restaurant was silent at first. Ethan sat stiffly, unsure if he was allowed to touch anything, while Max sat between his knees, watching the world through the window. John observed the boy discreetly, his tense posture, the way he flinched slightly whenever the car hit a bump, and the way his hand rested on Max as if the dog was his anchor. John's heart tightened. Lucas, his son, had once sat in that same seat, chattering about school, asking questions about the mountains, or pointing excitedly at passing cars. The memory stung, but looking at Ethan brought something else, an ache that wasn't as sharp, something more like longing. The restaurant John chose was a small, locally owned diner called Maple Ridge Grill, a warm place with golden lights and wooden booths. The owner, Bethany, was a stocky woman in her early 60s with silver-streaked auburn hair tied in a messy bun, rosy cheeks, and eyes full of curiosity. She wore a faded green apron decorated with hand-stitched maple leaves. Bethany had run the diner for decades, and her straightforward but caring nature made her beloved in the community. When John walked in, she gave him a familiar nod, but when she saw Ethan, skinny, tired, dust on his shoes, her expression shifted to concern. "Sit anywhere you like, sweetheart," she told Ethan, gesturing to a booth near the window. For Max, she even brought a bowl of water without being asked. "No one raised me to ignore a hungry boy and his loyal dog." Ethan murmured a soft, "Thank you," and Bethany smiled, patting his shoulder before returning to the counter. Once they settled in the booth, the warmth of the diner wrapped around them. Ethan stared at the menu as if it were treasure. John watched quietly. "You can order anything you'd like," John encouraged. Ethan hesitated, then picked a simple cheeseburger. When Bethany returned, she suggested the larger dinner platter. Ethan looked to John for permission, and John nodded gently. Let him have it. As they waited for the food, John finally asked the question that had been on his mind since the police station. "Ethan, do you have a home to go back to?" The boy stiffened. Max sensed the shift and pressed closer. Ethan swallowed. "Not really." His voice remained soft, almost apologetic. "It wasn't safe," John frowned. "Your stepfather?" Ethan nodded, eyes downcast. "He drank a lot. He hit me. A lot. After she wasn't there anymore, it got worse." His voice trembled slightly. "I ran away. Max came with me. He always protects me." John looked at him, really looked, and felt a deep pain spread through his chest. He had lost a family he loved. Ethan never had a chance to keep his. The difference was cruel and unfair. When the food arrived, Ethan ate slowly at first, then with growing hunger. But even as he devoured the warm meal, he still broke off pieces to give to Max, who ate gently from his hand. John watched the simple act and saw in Ethan a tenderness that he wished every child had. It reminded him of Lucas, who had once insisted on feeding their old golden retriever before touching his own dinner. After the plates were cleared, John took a deep breath. "Ethan, I want to ask you something." Ethan looked up nervously. "I have a big house, big enough for a family, but I live alone. Too alone. If you want, you can stay with me. You'll have a room, warm clothes, real meals, but there's one condition." Ethan froze. Max raised his head. John continued gently. "You must go to school. You must work hard. And you must let me take care of you and Max." His voice thickened slightly. "I want you to have a life better than the one you ran from." Tears gathered in Ethan's eyes so quickly he couldn't stop them. He grabbed Max, burying his face in the dog's fur. Max licked his cheek, sensing his overwhelming emotion. After a long moment, Ethan lifted his head and nodded again and again, unable to speak. When he finally managed words, they came out in a broken whisper. "Thank you. Thank you so much. I promise I'll work hard. I promise." John placed a steady hand on the boy's shoulder. For the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of something warm in his chest, something like healing. And for Ethan, the storm of his life had finally shown a ray of light. The first night Ethan and Max spent in John's mansion was unlike anything Ethan had ever known. The house itself sat on a quiet hillside overlooking the Colorado Valley. Tall windows, warm stone walls, and soft golden lights glowing like a sanctuary in the evening chill. After a warm bath, a real meal, and a night in a clean bed with Max resting peacefully beside him, Ethan felt something unfamiliar. Safety. But safety, especially for someone who had run for so long, always comes with fear that it could be taken away. The next morning, sunlight filtered gently through the cream-colored curtains in Ethan's new room. Max stretched on the floor, his thick fur gleaming in the soft light. Ethan rubbed his eyes, still adjusting to the idea that this wasn't a dream. He slipped on the fresh clothes John had provided, simple, comfortable, and clean, and followed Max downstairs. John was already in the dining room drinking coffee. He looked rested, yet thoughtful, wearing a dark sweater that contrasted with the silver beginning to show at his temples. When he saw Ethan, he smiled gently. "Sleep well?" Ethan nodded shyly. Max nudged John's hand, earning a soft chuckle and a scratch behind the ears. For a moment, they all seemed like a small, quiet family beginning a new chapter. But peace rarely lasts long for those who have escaped violence. Just after breakfast, one of the house staff rushed inside. Henry, the mansion's gate guard, was a tall man in his late 50s with leathery skin tanned from years of outdoor work, salt and pepper hair, and a thick mustache. He had the calm, steady demeanor of someone who had spent his life dealing with chaos and choosing patience over anger. Henry normally spoke slowly, like someone who had learned long ago that rushing rarely solved anything, but this time his voice was tight. "Mr. Miller," he said, "there's a man at the gate demanding to see you. He's yelling, and he says he wants the boy." Ethan froze. Max let out a low growl, fur rising defensively. John immediately placed a steady hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Who is he?" John asked. Henry hesitated but answered. "He said his name is Rick." The blood drained from Ethan's face. John didn't hesitate. "Keep the gate closed. I'll handle this." They walked together toward the gated driveway. Ethan trembled, his hands tightening into fists, and Max stayed glued to his side, growling with a protective rumble. As they approached, Rick's voice grew clearer, angry, slurred, and venomous. Rick stood at the iron gate looking worse than ever. His hair was messier, his beard thicker and unkempt, giving him a wilder, harsher look. His eyes were bloodshot, and his jaw clenched with rage. His clothes looked slept in, and there were fresh scratches across his knuckles, as if he'd gotten into a fight recently. Rick had always been a man broken by his own bitterness, but now he looked dangerous. When he saw Ethan, behind John, Rick slammed his fist against the gate. "You little brat! You think you can run off and make me look stupid? You owe me! He owes me!" Rick shouted, pointing directly at Ethan. "I raised him. I fed him. I deserve compensation. You—" He jabbed a finger toward John. "You owe me money if you're going to keep him." Ethan flinched at every word, but John stepped forward, calm and cold. "You didn't raise him," John said steadily. "You hurt him. And that ends today." Rick laughed bitterly. "You think you're better than me? You think money gives you rights over my—" "He's not your anything," John cut in sharply. "Not after what you did." Rick's face twisted. "I want $10,000, or I'll go to the police and tell them you kidnapped him." John didn't react with anger. Instead, he looked at Rick with something far more unsettling: certainty. Without looking away, he took out his phone and dialed a number. Within minutes, a dark SUV pulled up the drive. Two men stepped out, private investigators John often worked with. The first, Marcus Reed, was a fit man in his early 40s, with dark skin, sharp cheekbones, and short dreadlocks pulled back neatly. Marcus was calm, analytical, and spoke in a measured tone. Years of dealing with difficult cases had made him patient, but unwavering. The second, Tom Alvarez was slightly younger, with a solid build, tan skin, and short black hair. Tom had a more direct personality, straightforward, loyal, and protective, especially toward children. Marcus greeted John with a nod. "We compiled the background report." He handed John a file. John flipped through it, loud enough for Rick to hear each page turn. Rick shifted uneasily. "What's that?" John read aloud. "History of child abuse complaints, multiple unpaid debts, 2 cases of fraud, and a restraining order filed by your former neighbor." Rick stumbled back slightly. "That's not... Those are lies." "Everything is documented," Marcus said calmly. "We verified each record." John stepped closer to the gate. "You didn't come here for Ethan. You came here because you thought you could exploit him again. But you won't hurt him. Not ever again." Tom pulled out a radio. "The authorities are already on the way." Rick's anger crumbled into panic. "You can't. I just wanted..." But it was too late. A police cruiser pulled up behind him. 2 officers stepped out. Rick tried to protest, but his own history spoke louder than his excuses. They handcuffed him as he shouted and struggled, but no amount of shouting could change the inevitable. Ethan watched, shaking, but John gently pulled him close, one hand resting protectively on the boy's shoulder. "You're safe," John murmured. "No one has the right to hurt you. Not anymore." Max pressed against Ethan's legs, as if sealing the promise. For the first time in Ethan's life, his fear was met not with silence, but with protection. The months that followed unfolded like a quiet miracle in Ethan's life. Slow, gentle, and full of small changes that stitched his broken world back together. Winter arrived in Colorado with heavy gray skies and snow-dusted rooftops. But for the first time in years, Ethan didn't fear the cold. He woke each morning in a warm room painted in soft blues, with thick blankets and a sturdy wooden dresser that John had chosen just for him. Max slept on a plush dog bed beside Ethan's, stretching his paws happily as if he, too, had finally learned how to rest without fear. Every morning, John drove Ethan to school. The school itself, Ridgewood Middle School, was a modest brick building with a large playground out front and tall pine trees lining the sidewalks. On the first day, Ethan had clung nervously to Max's fur before stepping out of the car, but the school allowed Max to accompany him during registration thanks to the dog's calm behavior. Ethan's homeroom teacher, Mrs. Parker, was a woman in her early 40s with curly brown hair, warm olive skin, and bright eyes framed by stylish rectangular glasses. She was petite in height, but carried an air of certainty and quiet authority. Years of teaching had given her a gentle patience with children who struggled. When she first saw Ethan, shy, thin, clutching his backpack straps, her heart softened immediately. "You're welcome here, Ethan," she said with a warm smile. "If you ever need anything, you come to me. Understand?" Ethan nodded, surprised by how safe her voice sounded. School became a place of new beginnings. Though Ethan was behind in some subjects, he worked hard, often staying after class to study. Mrs. Parker helped him catch up without judgment, praising his determination. Max, waiting for him at home, greeted him at the door each day with excited barks and wagging tail, as if celebrating every small victory. Afternoons were even better. John made it a habit to return early from work whenever he could, taking Ethan and Max on long walks through the snowy trails behind the mansion. Max bounded happily through the snow, his thick coat glistening, while Ethan walked beside John, listening as the man shared memories he had once locked away. John spoke of Emily, his wife with her golden hair and soft laugh, and Lucas, a bright-eyed boy who loved drawing airplanes and asking endless questions about how things worked. As John talked, his voice wavered, but there was warmth there too, as if speaking about them finally brought peace instead of only pain. Ethan listened with deep respect, occasionally glancing up at John with the kind of empathy and gentleness that felt far too mature for his age. In those moments, John saw echoes of Lucas, not the face or the voice, but the kindness, the quiet bravery, the ability to care even after suffering. The bond between them grew naturally, like a plant finally given sunlight after being hidden in darkness. The mansion's staff also came to love Ethan. Henry, the gate guard, always greeted him with a slow smile and a fatherly, "How was school today, kiddo?" The housekeeper, Marilyn, a plump woman in her 50s with short blonde curls and a habit of humming old country songs, often left small treats for Ethan. Fresh cookies, warm muffins, or hot chocolate topped with marshmallows. She had 2 grown sons who had moved away, and caring for Ethan made her feel like she had family in the house again. Even Michael, the silent and stoic driver, found himself softening when Ethan eagerly asked about his past security jobs. Michael would chuckle, a rare sound, and share simple stories of bravery and lessons in loyalty. Slowly, the mansion transformed from a silent, grieving building into a home filled with laughter, footsteps, and the clicking of Max's claws on the wooden floors. One evening in late winter, snow gently falling outside, John called Ethan downstairs. John wore a dark overcoat and a serious expression, not frightening, but meaningful. "Put on something warm," he said. "We're going somewhere important." Ethan obeyed quietly, his heart fluttering with curiosity. Max trotted close behind them, as if he sensed something significant. The drive was short. They arrived at a modest, elegant office building downtown. A brass plaque read, "Miller and Bennett Legal Associates." Inside, the waiting room smelled of polished wood and peppermint. The lawyer, Mr. Bennett, was a tall, slender man in his early 50s, with silver hair combed neatly back, thin-rimmed glasses, and a composed, gentle manner. His navy suit was perfectly tailored, but his warm smile softened his otherwise formal appearance. He had known John for years, and was one of the few people who truly understood John's grief. When Ethan entered, Mr. Bennett bent slightly to his level and shook his hand. "You must be Ethan," he said kindly. "I've heard wonderful things about you." Ethan blushed, unsure what to say. John cleared his throat, turning to Ethan with a tremble in his voice. "Ethan, I brought you here because I want to ask you something important." He knelt down so he was eye level with the boy. Max sat beside Ethan, leaning against his leg. "I would like to adopt you. Legally. Officially. I want you to be my son, if you want that." The room fell silent except for the sound of Ethan's breath catching. His eyes filled instantly with tears. Large, heavy, unstoppable. He threw his arms around John, sobbing into his shoulder with all the emotion he had held inside for months. "Yes, I want that. I want that so much." John held him tightly, closing his eyes as if sealing a promise. Max barked softly, as if blessing the moment. Later that evening, they returned home. The snow had stopped, and the sky was tinted gold by the setting sun. On the front porch of the mansion, John stood with Ethan at his side and Max at his feet. The warm light washed over their faces, their breath rising in the crisp air. It was the picture of a family, not formed by blood, but by love, healing, and the simple courage to start over. For the first time in their lives, each of them felt complete. Sometimes, the greatest miracles don't come with thunder, lightning, or grand signs from the sky. Sometimes, God works quietly, through the kindness of a stranger, the courage of a child, or the loyalty of a dog who refuses to leave your side. Ethan didn't pray for riches. He didn't ask for a perfect life. All he wanted was safety, a warm meal, and someone who cared. And in the most unexpected way, God answered him, not with gold, but with a new father's embrace, a loving home and a future filled with hope. John lost everything he ever loved, and for years he walked through life with an empty heart. But God brought Ethan and Max into his world at the very moment he needed healing most. Two broken hearts met, and through them, God stitched together a new family. So maybe the miracle in this story is not luck. Maybe it is God reminding us that love still finds a way, even in the darkest places. That kindness never goes unseen. That every soul, lonely, hurting, or lost, is still held gently in His hands. If you are watching this right now, may this story remind you that you are never forgotten. God knows your struggles, your fears, your silent prayers at night. And sometimes, He sends His answers in the form of people, ordinary people, who become blessings in disguise. May God watch over you, protect your family, and fill your home with peace. If this story touched your heart, please share it so others can feel its warmth too. Don't forget to leave a comment below and tell us how this story made you feel. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe to the channel. Every subscription helps our small storytelling family continue to grow. May God bless you, your loved ones, and every step of your journey. Thank you for being here.